Good morning, welcome back. Today is January 15th, and before we get back to talking about Luke and Acts, let's check out what happened on this day in history. Well, first of all, it was on this date, legend has it, that Nebuchadnezzar II in 588 BC began the siege of Jerusalem. This is the siege that led to the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Now, keep in mind, the dates are a little squishy, could have been this day, could have been a year before, could have been a year later. But one tradition has it that it was on this date. Again, the siege itself lasted about 2 years and ultimately ended up in the fall of the southern kingdom, or the Babylonian, and the beginning of the full-on Babylonian captivity. You can read about it in the Bible in 2 Kings 25, also in 2 Kings 36, and a couple of passages in Jeremiah and Lamentations talk about it as well. But that was on this date in 588 BC. A little bit more recently, it was on this date in 1702 that Isaac Watts was called to pastor a church in Newington, England. In other words, this is the day that Isaac Watts entered the ministry. Now, Isaac Watts was famous for a number of reasons. Some of us would think Isaac Watts would think of songs, and of course he was certainly a great songwriter. Some 750 hymns, many of them we still use on a very regular basis. When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, Joy to the World, O God, Our Help in Ages Past, I Sing the Mighty Power of God, We're Marching to Zion, that song. Some of these are hymns that we use quite a bit. But Isaac Watts was more influential in the world of hymnody than just that. He actually was one of the principal persons in the 18th century that was able to move the church out of a reliance on the Psalms and into what we commonly refer to as hymns today. In other words, prior to Isaac Watts, most singing in churches, if there was any, was basically psalms set to music. Whereas Isaac Watts was able to write songs that dealt with the Christian experience, songs that interpreted the New Testament in light of the Old Testament. For example, Joy to the World is Psalm 80, I want to say, based on Psalm 80. But be that as it may, and of course just songs about the Christian experience that were not necessarily tied into the hymns. But he was very influential in that. Another thing that most people don't realize is that Isaac Watts was actually quite a writer and philosopher. He actually wrote a textbook on logic that went through 20 editions and was very popular in the 18th century. So just kind of an interesting thing that besides being a poet and a writer and a preacher, he was actually quite the logician and philosopher. But he started his ministry on this date in 1702. In 1927, the Tennessee court overturned the John T. Scopes conviction on a technicality. If you remember, the Scopes trial took place in 1925, perhaps the high point of 20th century fundamentalism. 2 years later, on a technicality, Scopes was found not guilty, or the case was thrown out, overturned on a conviction, and it was never retried after that. In 1948, the movie Treasure of the Sierra Madre was released on this date. Some of you may remember this. Humphrey Bogart, Walter Huston, I want to say, is in it. But this is the movie best known for the phrase or the line, "Badges, we ain't got no badges. We don't need no stinking badges." But that was released on this date in 1948. Today is Joan of Arc's birthday, born on this date in 1412. A young woman who led the French to some victories, but ultimately was captured by the English and burned at the stake. Famous enough that Mark Twain wrote a book about her. Again, a hero to the French, even to this day. And of course, being January 15th, today is Martin Luther King's birthday. Wish you all a happy Martin Luther King's birthday holiday this week. And finally, it was on this date in 1947 that Elizabeth Short died. Actually, it was on this date in 1947 that Elizabeth Short was found dead. They don't actually know when Elizabeth Short died, or who killed her for that matter. Now, some of you may be thinking to yourself, well, who is Elizabeth Short? Well, she's better known by her name, or their nickname, the Black Dahlia. It's one of those great unsolved mysteries, unsolved murders of the 1940s. But there are movies, books, all kinds of stuff made about this particular situation. Her nickname, the Black Dahlia, comes from the fact that she liked to wear dahlias and black. So she was called the Black Dahlia. Young girl, mid-20s, found dead in LA on this date, 1947. All right. Well, with that cheery ending, let's get back into talking about Luke chapter 15. I'm sorry, today's the 15th. I think today, I don't know where we are today. I think we're in Luke 22. So let's talk about that. So let's get back to it. Good morning, welcome back. We're continuing our discussion of Luke and Acts. Today we're in Luke 23 with Paul's second defense speech in Jerusalem. Again, Acts is a book that talks about how the gospel got to Rome. The second half of the book centers on the story of Paul and his role as an apostle and his role in bringing the gospel to both the Gentiles and to Rome, which is where I believe Theophilus is located. Good morning, welcome. Good morning, welcome back. We're here today to continue our discussion of Luke and Acts. We're in the last part of the book of Acts. Today we're going to be talking about Acts chapter 23, that part continuing the story of Paul's return to Jerusalem. Today we're going to continue with his second defense speech, this one in front of the Sanhedrin. And remember, Acts is a book that talks about a couple of different things. It talks about the progress of the gospel from Jerusalem to Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth, and more specifically, how the gospel gets to Rome. Okay, but it's also, especially this second half, it's a book about the Apostle Paul, and it kind of establishes his bona fides as an apostle. Okay, and shows just the things that he went through. And you also see a lot of commonalities, or you see the origin of a lot of the issues that he deals with in some of his epistles. Okay, so last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked about Paul's return to Jerusalem, and we said people that didn't want him. Agabus says, if you're going to get arrested. Luke and others said, don't go, but he did. He comes back, and he's talked to by James. They say, hey, listen, we got this great idea. The great idea doesn't work. He gets captured. The crowd is about to kill him. And then for his own protection, he's arrested or taken into the custody of a Roman commander. Okay, and this Roman commander lets him talk to the crowd. That doesn't work. He's going to torture him, but doesn't do that because Paul reminds him that he's a Roman citizen. Okay, so the Roman commander then says, well, I'm going to get him together with his the religious leaders. Maybe they can sort this thing out. Okay, and so today we're going to talk about that. Remember in verse, I'll pick it up again in chapter 22, beginning with verse 30. The commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews. So the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the members of the Sanhedrin to assemble. Then he brought Paul and had him stand before them. So one thing is clear, this commander has some authority. Okay, he can cause the Sanhedrin to assemble. He can say, hey, you guys need to come in for a meeting. Okay, and they come. Okay, so Paul is brought in. Verse 23, then he brought Paul and had him stand before them. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, my brothers. And this is an interesting thing. Okay, my brothers. Okay, so Paul was the Pharisee of the Pharisee, and he, whether or not he was actually a member of the Sanhedrin, he certainly was somebody very well known to the Sanhedrin back in the day. Now, keep in mind, it's been over a decade since he was there, or it's been over a decade since he was, involved with the Sanhedrin, 15 years or so, something like that. It's been quite a while, and yet he's talking about my brothers. Okay, so I mean, that phrase has different connotations. Just there's theological connotations. There's a power kind of connotation. There's sociological things. There's theological things. Okay, he's like, we're equals. My brothers. My brothers. Okay. I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. Okay. And obviously the Sanhedrin disagrees. Okay. This is just his opening shot. At this, and how do we know that the Sanhedrin disagrees? Well, verse 2. At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. So, hey, give him you don't talk like that. So basically Paul is, I think the way it's being interpreted, or the way it's being received by the Sanhedrin, by the people, by the leaders up there, Paul is standing in front of them. Listen, I am just like you, and I didn't do anything wrong. Slap him. Okay. At this, the high priest ordered those around. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. Okay, now this is getting into the minutia of the law, but he's like, wait a minute, you're not even playing by your own rules. Okay, you're not playing by say you're going to be objective, and you're obviously not being objective. You're not playing by the rules. Who do you think you are? Says to this guy. Okay. Those who were standing near Paul said, how dare you insult God's high priest? Now, here's the interesting question. How come Paul doesn't know that this is the high priest? Paul replied, brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people. Okay, now why doesn't Paul recognize him? Now, one idea, and not too many people support this, but it's an idea that's out there. One, people said, when Paul says, I did not realize he was the high priest, okay, he's being sarcastic. That's your high priest? That's the high priest? Oh, forgive me. That's your high priest? Anybody who acts like that couldn't be that's your high priest? Okay. The problem with that is then he turns around and then he apologizes, says, do not speak evil. And he quotes the verse, a passage that indicates that he has done something wrong. Okay, so he kind of apologizes. So it's like, if he's being sarcastic, he wouldn't, more likely, again, it's been a decade, it's been 15 years. It could be a different high priest. So Paul doesn't know. Paul's been out of the loop. Okay, he's not on the email list anymore. Okay, keeping up with who's who. The high priest could be, he's 15 years older. Okay, maybe his facial hair is different. Maybe he's wearing a different outfit. Maybe because of this ad hoc type meeting that they've got going here, they're not sitting in the right places. Okay, maybe that he's not sitting in the central seat. He's sitting over here because he figures I'll just let the minions do all of the work, kind of thing. There's any number of reasons, but what we can say pretty clearly is Paul doesn't realize that it's the high priest that says that. And as soon as he realizes what he's done, he apologizes for it. And then he changes the subject, beginning with verse 6. Okay. Then Paul, knowing that some were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, my brothers, I am a Pharisee descended from the Pharisees. Okay. So he's clearly saying, I am a Pharisee. Okay, again, we've talked about these two groups before. Okay, the Pharisees were the very nationalistic ones. They were the ones that looked for the return. They believed in the, they believed in the resurrection, which we're going to find out here. But they were very pro-national, very anti-Rome. Okay, whereas the Sadducees were generally wealthier, and they were the ones more likely to be sympathetic with Rome. Okay, but one of the big distinctions between the two is support for a resurrection, the idea or the act of the resurrection. I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead. Okay, so now he doesn't really get much further than this. Okay, that's it. Because what he's done is he's thrown gasoline on this simmering fire between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. This is sort of a burning controversy between those two. And he comes down hard, taking sides. Okay? When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, and there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were now keep in mind, all of this is going on in the presence of this Roman commander, and he's probably sitting back like this, going, "Seriously, But so this is all going on, and he says there was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man. Okay, so this is sort of like Pilate. I find nothing wrong with this man. There's nothing wrong with this man. They said, what if a spirit or angel has spoken to him? Okay, what if he really did hear from a spirit or a Christophany? I guess for them it would be a theophany. What if they really did hear from the angel of the Lord on the road to Damascus? They're not going to rule it out. Now, to a certain extent, they're protecting one of their own. Okay, he's a Pharisee. Maybe some of them recognize him. Maybe some of them remember him from back in the good old days. I don't know. To a certain extent, they're doing that. Okay, but I think one of the things that's going on here, and this is just in terms of the literary composition of the book, that Luke is including all of these defense speeches to kind of knock away any objections you would have to Paul. Okay, so again, here Paul's like, not everybody disagreed with Paul. There were Pharisees that would give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay, and this would, of course, increases Paul's credibility. Okay, and again, the more we get toward the end of the book, the more we see Paul's credibility as an apostle going up, 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 up. Okay, so the dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. So this commander's idea is like, well, this isn't working out like I thought. He rescued this guy from the crowd, so he brings him to the leaders thinking, okay, he'll be safe here. We can have a nice, rational, adult discussion. Wrong. Okay. So he ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. Once again, that Antonia fortress. And again, I'm going to just a picture of the Antonia fortress. Okay. The following night, okay, well, let me back up. So basically what you have here is what in 21st century court U.S. Western thing, you have a mistrial. Okay. They can't come to it. And so this commander is stuck with this guy who he knows if he just lets him out on the street, he's going to get killed by this crowd. If he gives him to the leaders, he's going to get killed by half of the group. So he doesn't really know what to do with this group. Okay. The following night, which suggests that Paul spends another night in the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." Okay, now this is a Christophany. Okay, again, a theophany is just an appearance of God in a physical form. Okay, very oftentimes in the Old Testament, where you hear about the angel of the Lord, a more specific type of that is a Christophany, and that is a pre-incarnate Christ. I guess now that I think about it, it wouldn't be a pre-incarnate, but it's an appearance of Christ because it's just a post-incarnate Christophany. Actually, I don't know if that's such a thing now that I think about it, but whatever. This is Christ. How do we know about it? Because that's who Paul is witnessing to. Okay, and it's as you have testified about who? Me. So whoever the Lord is, Paul is testifying. Paul's testifying about Christ. So Paul sees Christ, and Christ appears to Paul and says, "As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you're going to testify about me in Jerusalem." Okay. So from this point on, this allows Paul a reasonable degree of confidence that he's going to get to Rome. Okay, he's going to get there. He doesn't know how, but he's going to get to Rome. All right. The next morning, some Jews, again, this is just a friendly bunch here, formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Now, I don't know how this, again, these guys are zealous for the law. They're passionate. They're willing to say, listen, we are not going to eat or drink, which means you've got about 3 days. So I understand it. You can go about 3 days without eating or drinking, and then you're going to just pass out. Okay, so they got about 3 days to get this task taken care of. Okay, and there's 40 of them. Okay, more than 40 men, verse 13, were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, we have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring them before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about this case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here. Okay, so maybe several of these guys had seen what kind of contingent brought Paul in, and they figure with 40 of us, we can overpower whatever protection Paul comes with. We can get to him. We can kill him. Maybe they're going to have people with bows and arrows from a distance. I don't know what their plan is, okay? But they go to the chief priest and elders and say, listen, we need you to call the commander, tell him to bring Paul back, and make whatever promises. You don't have to worry about it because he's not going to be alive by the time he gets here. We're going to kill him before he gets here, okay? How do we know the chief priests and elders are going to go along with this? Well, because they have before. Okay, remember, what does Paul say back in Acts chapter 9 or in Acts 6 through 8? Paul is going to the chief priests and elders and saying, hey, listen, give me the papers and I'll go out and drag these people back in there and we'll kill them. Okay, what happens when Judas goes to the chief priests and elders and says, listen, I'll get your guy. So again, I mean, this dedication is being zealous for the law, takes a very serious turn here, okay? So you've got 40 guys that are willing to kill Paul, and the chief priests and elders that are willing to do their part, okay? Now, clearly they've sent the message. So they send the message. We know that based on something that happens a little bit later. But little do they know, verse 16, but when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. So Paul has a sister. Not surprising, okay? And he's got a nephew. His sister has a child, and he's got a nephew. Now, maybe the nephew is there because he's taking care of Paul, okay? Paul is in prison. He needs somebody to bring him clothes, bring him food, whatever. I mean, he's in custody. He's not necessarily in prison, but he's certainly in custody. Maybe that's why he's there, and nobody knows who he is. But this nephew overhears the overhears this conversation. Okay, overhears the making of this plot. Now, the nephew is probably fairly young. Okay, he's not like he's 35 years old. Okay, I'm guessing he's like 10-ish. Okay, just based on what happens here. Okay, then Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him. So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you. The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and said, what is it you want to tell me? So just the fact that come here, let me take you. So if it was a 35-year-old guy, probably not. But if it's like a 10-year-old, 8 to 10 years old enough to understand what this plot is, okay, but young enough that a commander, come here, takes him by the hand and says, okay, what do you want to tell me? Okay, the commander, doesn't know what's coming, but he says, some Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request, which suggests that the request has been sent. Okay, so there's some time lag here. Okay, so as soon as the commander hears this, he knows, all right. And now he knows these people are crazy, right? He's had to pull them out of the leadership, in front of the Sanhedrin. He thought they were going to kill him. He thought they were going to kill him in front of this, in this crowd. And he knows he's a Roman citizen. So he can't just wash his hands of the whole matter because this is a Roman citizen. That's who the commander is there fundamentally to protect. Okay? So he's like, okay, I got to do something here. Then he called 2 of his centurions and ordered them. And he says, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide horses for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix. Okay? So the commander writes a letter. He wrote a letter as follows. Claudius Lysias. Okay, now that's the commander's name. Claudius Lysias. Okay? To His Excellency Governor Felix. Okay. Greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. Okay, so he's sending him to Caesarea. He's sending him to Antioch. Okay, this is where all of Paul's friends are, but it's away from the temple, away from these Jews. Now, interestingly, in this letter, you notice there's no mention about the whole arresting and flogging. None of that's in there. Conveniently, he's forgotten that. Okay, in fact, he makes it look a lot, like he's far more up, on the level than he particularly was. Okay. He says, the man was seized by the Jews and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops to rescue him, okay? For I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. Okay, so he learns that he's a Roman citizen after he rescues him. He's just out there to quell this riot that's going on. And then, so you see the commander's like, hey, let's kind of stretch it a little bit here, right? But, hey, that's all right. I wanted to know why, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin, okay? I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment from his perspective. Okay? Now, he doesn't mention about how nutty the meeting with the Sanhedrin got, but he does say at the end, I told the Sanhedrin to come visit you. Now, perhaps he's thinking that one of the reasons why the Sanhedrin was so vehement was because they were on home turf. Okay? And he figures if he sends them up to Antioch, to Caesarea, they'll be on they won't be on their home field. They won't have the home field advantage. Okay. So he sends Paul. Okay. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought them as far as Antipatris. Okay, which is about the halfway point. Okay, so they basically he does this right away. So he says. He says, go get them, and they get where, let's see, where did it, so the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them. The next day, they let the cavalry go with him while they returned to the barracks. Okay, wait a minute, I'm missing a point here. He called 2 of his, verse 23. Then he called 2 of his centurions and ordered them, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. So you're going to get 470 soldiers to accompany Paul. Okay? He knows he's got to deal with 40 zealous Jews. So he brings 470 soldiers. Okay? And they take off. Now, it's about a 70-mile walk to Antioch. And they take off right away. Or as quickly as possible. Okay. Do they give them the slip? I don't know. But if you imagine what happens is they go halfway. And when they get to about the halfway point, 200 of them turn around and come back. So if the 40 are following along the road, waiting for, they've got to get past 200 people coming this way. And no doubt the 200 people coming back are told, spread out, look for 40 zealous, by this point, very hungry Jews looking to kill this guy. Okay? But whatever, so they give him the slip. All right? They give him the slip. And the interesting thing here to me is as you saw, okay, well, what happened to these 40 guys? They took a solemn vow. Did they all starve themselves to death? I probably not. I'm guessing they didn't. Okay, but he says, so the soldiers carrying out their order, but next the cavalry go on with them while they return to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Now this is just kind of trying to, you remember in Luke where Pilate finds out that Jesus is from Galilee, and he goes, oh, well, yeah, I'm going to send you out to Herod. Go talk to Herod. And I think this is what Felix is trying to do, right? But doesn't work because he's in his domain. It says, learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear your case when your accusers get here. Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. Okay, so now Paul is in Antioch. Okay, Paul is out of Jerusalem, and now we started what possibly is Paul's fourth missionary journey, or the trip to Rome. Paul's trip to Rome. You can call it whichever you want. Okay, so beginning in verse 24, we're going to talk about, now he's going to have 3 meetings in Antioch. He's going to meet with Felix in chapter 24. He's going to deal with Festus in chapter 25, and then with King Agrippa at the end of verse 25. And then by chapter 26, he's going to be just sent off to Rome. So we're going to cover that next week. I'm going to cut it a little short today, but that's all right. We'll make up for it next week when we kind of go through these, again, more defense speeches as Paul makes his way, and the gospel makes their way to Rome. So again, if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. Send me an email, Facebook message, carrier pigeon, however you want to do it. It's fine with me. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you soon.